Well, the Trump administration is now looking for ways to try and salvage the controversial Iranian nuclear deal, we're told. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says the U.S. is working to, quote, fix it, while CIA Director Mike Pompeo is taking those sentiments even further. He is outlining some very specific ways in which he thinks the U.S. could try and tweak the pact that was negotiated by the Obama administration.
They could do something. They could take some of the weaknesses from the agreement, from the Joint Comprehensive Agreement, extend deadlines, put snapback sanctions in a place where they could really happen. So there are a set of things they could do to make that deal better, and then ultimately the president will have to make the decision about whether to remain in the deal or not.
So will those set of things work? Jonathan Schnanzer is with us. He is a former terrorism analyst at the Treasury Department and is vice president of research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, always good to see you.
Pleasure.
We just had a short list, but to you, what is the most important part of the deal that we should tinker with to change? I mean, would that be the sunset clause? What do you think?
Look, I think the fatal flaw here of the deal are the sunset provisions. In other words, in about 10 years, perhaps less, perhaps more, we're going to see all the provisions of that 2015 nuclear deal expire, and that's going to mean that Iran is going to have a paved pathway or a glide path to a nuclear weapon, and there's going to be very little that any of us can do about it. So we can either kick the can down the road, which I believe really was the intent of the deal when it was signed back in 2015, or we can begin to address it now. There are other things that I think we probably could look at in terms of centrifuge production or access to military sites, perhaps reimposing sanctions on some of the entities that probably shouldn't have been delisted in the first place. These are other ways that we can address the deal as well. But I think, as Director Pompeo noted, it is a flawed deal. The president wants to change aspects of it, and I think it is well warranted.
But, you know, the Iranians are never going to go for that. I mean, you know, they want that sunset clause, say critics, because, as you said, it gives them a green light. If you read it, the language is unbelievable. It says it has dates. It goes right to the end and says, well, basically, they're not in this language, but it's saying you can go ahead if you want and make a nuclear bomb, which the Iranians have always denied is their intent.
Look, the Iranians, there's no doubt they got just about everything they possibly could have ever wanted out of this deal. That all they need to do is to just bide their time, and eventually they'll have all the money that we front-loaded from this deal and then have the nuke at the end of it. So there's no reason why they would want to see this thing changed. But I think that we can change our laws in terms of the way that we see Iran holding to the deal. We can change some of the terms. We can make it such that when we see them launching missiles, when we see them cracking down on their own people in the streets, when we see them supporting terrorism or other violations, that we have the ability to impose new sanctions, or we have the ability to snap back certain sanctions, or we have the ability to walk away from the deal.
Yeah, and what would that achieve, though? I mean, you just talked about missiles. I mean, that's not even in the deal. You know, they freely can blast off these intercontinental ballistic missiles to their heart's content, and the Europeans are getting billions and billions of dollars thanks to this deal. I mean, they're not going to change.
No, they're not. And that's why I think that if we look at what we want out of this deal, if we're able to work it out, Democrats and Republicans come to some sort of a bipartisan agreement in terms of when we would start to impose new sanctions, when we would walk away from the deal.
And what would that achieve? Well, I mean, would the Europeans then follow us, or would they be defiant? I mean, over at the Security Council, they're already on the record saying that no matter what we do, it won't change the deal. It's an international agreement under the Security Council, you know, rubber stamp of approval, and we can't change it.
Well, I think we can when you think about the kind of power that we have, particularly through sanctions. I think that there is no power that rivals us economically. So I think that there are still things that we can do. There's still some influence that we can wield.
Such as?
Again, when you start to impose some of those sanctions and we put other countries on notice that they can either deal with Iran or with us, but they can't deal with both, they're going to choose the United States 10 times out of 10. And that's really what made the sanctions work the first time around. People forget that. And I don't think that the Europeans will dig in their heels when they know that trade with the United States is on the line.
Well, look what just happened at the General Assembly. It was either you're with us or you're not with us when it comes to moving the embassy and recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And what, like 15, 20? It's always the same countries, some of them that side with us. Grand Palau, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, do you think really that the French or the Germans are going to go along with us when it comes to cutting off their billions of dollars from the mullahs?
Look, I think that if we put them on notice and then start to implement some of these policies, I don't think that a lot of those countries at the United Nations really understood that the Trump administration was serious. I think that if we begin to show them how serious we are, they may begin to recalculate. And that is really what we need to do here. I think we sort of let our foot off the gas. We decided that we were going to let other countries take the lead, the so-called lead from behind from the Obama administration. It had a disastrous effect on our Iran policy, and I think internationally we're still paying for it. So I think the idea here is to get back in the driver's seat. No one said it was going to be easy, but it is about time.
And finally, a word about the brave demonstrators who've been out on the streets in Tehran. Some young people who have sacrificed their lives for the future of their country. What can the administration do? What should the U.S. do to try and support them?
Look, I think that there are two things that we need to drive home here. One is that we need to continue to message to the Iranian people just how much money the Iranians are spending on their adventurous foreign policies. The fact that they spend upwards of $15 billion a year in Syria to prop up the Assad regime, or they spend $800 million a year on Hezbollah, or a couple $100 million a year on Hamas. I think these things will make the Iranian people outraged, and I suspect that would not be the last of the protests that we see on the streets. That, and we need to start to impose sanctions on those entities, specifically the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, and the Basij, as it's known, that domestic crackdown force. If we start to impose sanctions there, I think that also sends a very strong message, and hopefully we get some of the international community to jump in as well.
Well, they got a message back in 2009 that for some it wasn't strong enough, so we'll see what will happen this time. Jonathan Stanzer, thank you for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
Of course.